Once again, welcome everyone to the 5th lecture in the series we call International Primatology Lectures on Past, Present, and Future Perspectives of the Field. This lecture series is organized by the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology, or CICASP for short, at the Primate Research Institute of Kyoto University. And through these lectures, we hope to foster conversations about the development of the field of primatology and how to become a good scientist, or a great scientist, hopefully. To that end, we invite distinguished scientists from around the globe to tell us about their career trajectories and share their advice with early career scientists, especially graduate students who are with us. And today's guest speaker is Dr. Elisabetta Visalberghi. I am going to ask the director of CICASP, Dr. Mike Huffman, to introduce her.
Thank you very much. Elisa, welcome. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be able to invite you to speak today. I'm sure the audience has been waiting with much eagerness to hear what you have to say. I'll just briefly say a few words. First thing is to sell the book that Elisabetta was very involved in putting together several years ago now. I remember getting emails from Elisa and Linda Fettigan saying that they're locked up in this little house somewhere and they're writing about capuchins and it'll be the best book you've ever read. And that's what it turned out to be. For anyone who wants to know anything about capuchins, then you need to go to this book. Personally, I've known Elisabetta for about 25 years, a little bit longer maybe. And every year since we met the first time in Italy, my wife and I have been to Italy and we've met at Elisabetta there many times, and we've very often enjoyed her warm company, and it's been a pleasure knowing her. And I think you'll all enjoy what she has to speak about today. And just one more plug about the research that Elisabetta and her colleagues have been engaged in. I'm sure you'll hear about it today because it's so central to the work she's done, and it's such an important part about primatology. But when their work on stone tool use in capuchins first came out, they just kind of left the chimpanzee world in the dust, so to speak. They did such detailed work, such advanced technology and different things to look at so many different aspects that I was just really, really impressed. And at that point, I realized why they call capuchins the apes of Latin America. They're really a smart species, and no one can tell us better how smart they are than Elisabetta. So I'll let you tell us about your life and your career.
Thanks, Mike, for your nice work. I'm going to talk about a little bit my story as a primatologist, and I will begin with, oh, it doesn't move. Why? Wait. My computer is stuck. Okay. I was born in Aosta, close to the Mont Blanc that everybody knows in the world. And I grew up, I would say, rather happy in nature, in the woods, close to the rivers. And I liked animals, no doubt. Look at my happy face. When I started to think about what to study at the university, I really didn't know, because there were many things I liked. Thus, I started to ask myself, when am I feeling good? When am I happy? What fulfills me the most? What I like in life? And I realized that there was something that always made me happy, no matter how I felt. And this was nature, being in the middle of flowers, rivers, animals, if possible. This was really what I liked in life. So I ended up studying biology, and animal behavior. And I did my thesis at the University of Rome, La Sapienza, on something that I didn't like very much, but was okay. That were the grasshoppers and the phenomena of cryptism and mimetism in grasshoppers. Soon after, I moved to Pisa, to the Scuola Normale Superiore, which is a very prestigious school with a very prestigious mentor, Professor Floriano Papi. And there I started to really be involved in research. I studied the orientation of homing pigeons and feral pigeons, rock pigeons, those that lived in the wild. And I compared their abilities. I looked at the magnetic orientation of these birds and several other things. But I soon realized that I wanted to be back home. That means to be in Rome the rest of my life. And for this reason, I had to change topic. And I brought my fellowship with me to Rome, where I moved to the Institute of Psychology of the Research National Council, the most important research institution in Italy. And I started as a junior researcher to collaborate in a big project between the Research National Council, the University of Rome, the Institute of Health, focused on food neophobia to control the urban population of rats. So something very interesting from my point of view and also useful for the society, something I really liked it. And I worked on it like crazy, trying to learn all possible things for 1 year. Then the people that ran the project, the senior scientists, had a discussion and the final fights. And all of a sudden, without even telling one word before the decision was taken, the project was canceled and I had nothing to do anymore. So this was really a sad circumstance. And I went to my director, Raffaele Misiti, the director of the Institute, and I asked him, well, what should I do? I mean, everything ended all of a sudden. What should I do? And he told me, I am the director of a research institute of human psychology. The closest animals to humans are the non-human primates. Go to the zoo and study them. Wow. I thought, how can I do this? I mean, what can I do at the zoo? My director is crazy. But at the same time, I needed my fellowship. And I said, why not? I mean, I like monkeys. I like all kinds of animals. Why not to try? Perhaps I will become a primatologist. So this was really a strange beginning, I think. But at the zoo, there were several nice animals to study. There were a brand new colony of Japanese macaques that just arrived from Japan in the Rome Zoo. And unfortunately, there was also a mother that didn't take care of the baby. So there was a hand-reared newborn macaque to raise and to learn from. And I studied the motor development and the cognitive development of this young monkey. And there was also a hand-reared gorilla, which provided me with the opportunity of do something experiment on spatial tasks. So at the end, there were many research opportunities, and I thought, lucky me to have gone to the zoo. But of course, we're really the beginning for a scientist. I mean, I didn't have anybody to learn from. I didn't have a teacher. And the next phase of my life was really of despair. and a big need for learning. Despair because I felt alone. In Italy, there were no primatologists interested in behavior, nobody to learn from. So I told myself I should find human and non-human primates to learn from. And I felt like a scribe in the Egypt time, looking for a Hamadryas baboon to dictate important and smart things and write them down. So I really was looking for somebody like a god. And I'm not exaggerating when I talk about despair. I really felt extremely isolated. But of course, I looked in the literature, I read a lot of papers by many primatologists, and I chose some of them. And I wrote some of them to ask whether they could invite me to spend a period in their lab with a fellowship. And many answered. And among the many that answered, I must say there are still primatologists that I like very much, like Hans Kummer, Menzel, Rambo, and others that were important, Rosenblum, that are still highly valued from my point of view. But I ended up in California at the Primate Center. I thought there are more opportunities to see different kinds of monkeys, working with Professor Bill Mason. That was a real mentor for me. And I also found two species, the titi monkey and the squirrel monkeys, with whom I did my first, I must say, very interesting experiment. I worked with the two species, comparing them on problem-solving success. And what I found in this study that I think affected my career later was that, of course, titi monkey do much worse than squirrel monkeys in many of the tasks, but not because they are less, quotation, intelligent, but because they are just less arrogant, less destructive, less prone to explore everything. Titi monkeys are shy, are reserved, they act in pair, the male and the female together. So this style of approaching the task made these species less successful. It's not a question of being less intelligent. Well, as I was telling you, monkeys can teach you things. And this is what simia docet in Latin means. And Capuchins told me and taught me many, many things during my career. And why so? Because at the entrance of the zoo, before reaching the macaques, there was a small group of Capuchin monkeys. And I always looked at them before going to the gorilla or going to see the macaques. And especially there was one young adult male, Cammello, that was particularly nice. And once I saw that he was using a boiled potato to crack open peanuts, shelled peanuts. So something completely, I don't know, crazy, unnecessary, because of course the boiled potato smashed, and perhaps the peanuts too, but was not a very necessary behavior. So I ended up in studying together with a colleague the nut-cracking behavior of this monkey, Cammello. And this was a rather successful thing that we did, because we stated in this paper that in fact Capuchins are selective. If they have a better tool, they use a better tool and not a mashed potatoes or a boiled potato. So it was a step ahead. And of course, I fell in love with Capuchins. So the first take-home message, or by the way, this in Italy, I don't know if elsewhere is the same thing, is the symbol for being lucky. having fortune. And so I think that my career was fortunate so far. So, and this was true in many ways. I was only slightly goal-oriented, but I had the chance of witnessing important events. And this is exactly the same concept that Huffman and also Zimbo mentioned in their talk. Small little events that change your life. And of course, I worked hard to exploit the opportunities. So in phase 2 of my life, I started to become more international. Also, because during my period in Davis, I met friends and people that showed me how large is the world and how many other primatologists there were. And I started with going at the IPS in '84 in Nairobi, where I met Dori Forghesi. And Dori had the same, Bill Mason as a PhD professor and stayed at UC Davis just before I arrived there. And by chance, at the IPS in Nairobi, we both had an oral presentation on tool use in Capuchins. We talked a little and promised to meet again before the end of the meeting for further discussion, but it did not happen. We both left for our field trips. But, and here again I'm rather lucky, I was watching the flamingos close to the Lake Nakuru when I start seeing people packing to leave, packing their tent to leave. And one of these two people that I saw was Dori Forghesi. So I ran to her, and in a few minutes, we outlined what could be the theme of a joint project that was later granted by the CNR. And just to tell the young people how the world was at that time, consider that a proposal went by mail back and forth from Italy to United States. So it was not easy to do elsewhere. So it took us a long time to write it. In this phase in which I was open-minded and visiting other places, I had a fellowship to spend 3 months in Kassel, where Professor Christian Welker had large groups of Capuchin monkeys. And there I first noticed that the monkeys did not have so many things to do in their cage. The cages were really empty. So I designed an experiment to provide objects of different types, wooden blocks of different sizes. And in a second phase, I started to see whether any of these monkeys could learn to crack nuts. Okay, there was one individual, Toko, that I loved very, very much because it reminded me of Cammello, that not only was extremely happy when given a wooden block, but learned in a couple of weeks to crack open nuts. And at this point, I must say that one of the point that many other primatologists always told me when I was enthusiastic about tool use in Capuchins was that first, this was the byproduct of captivity. And in fact, in nature, I mean, there was only very old anecdotes of something similar to nut cracking, but nut cracking did not occur in nature. And I started at the end of one of the papers to think about why this nut cracking was not observed in natural condition. And I wrote, For arboreal monkeys, the chances of manipulating stones or other percussors and finding horizontal surfaces on which to pound are scarce. Therefore, the absence of observation of tool used to crack and open nuts can be tentatively explained by the scarcity of appropriate conditions for innovative behavior to arise. However, from my point of view, both cognitive abilities and motor skills of tufted capuchin monkeys permit the prediction that these species, if observed in field sites with nuts, stone, and anvils, would be likely to show innovative behaviors and tool use for cracking nuts. And in fact, we knew from Izawa, a Japanese primatologist, that in nature, capuchins bang objects and on surfaces on the knot of trees to crack them open. However, he did not notice, nor other primatologists, the nut cracking behavior with tools. Well, in Kassel, when I was studying that colony of monkeys, I also see very interesting behavior. Before the acquisition of nut cracking, but even right after the acquisition, the monkeys were doing very unusual things. They were pounding the nut directly on the tool. They were pounding the nut by the tool. They were pounding the tool and holding the nut in their mouth, or they were pounding the tool with the nut above it. So in a very unstable position. And this was really interesting to watch. And the same with Dori Forghesi. We are doing other experiments in her lab in the United States. We saw, for example, individuals that try to extract glued nuts from a board by using a stick. So, I mean, capuchins seemed often to try the impossible, not having a very clear idea of what is necessary or useless to do with tools. Well, another good news. A primate center was built by the CNR to host the zoo capuchins. So the poor camello that had an awful cage at the entrance of the zoo moved to our brand new cages. So we were able to do observation and experiments with this small colony of capuchins, and a few individuals arrived later from zoo, from confiscated capuchins by the government and so on. And what is important to say is that at that time, the behavior of capuchins was better known in the field than in the lab. And this was a very good opportunity to discover new things. So again, was a very lucky circumstance. And of course, given my overall ignorance, I had no preconcept about results, and I was very naive and insecure. So I would say, particularly open-minded compared to other primatologists. So most scientists, I'm reading now that there are so many errors of spelling, but I'm sorry. Most scientists consider tool using capuchins unlikely and a byproduct of captivity. And I think that Camello and his group members, as soon as they arrived at our primate center, helped me to better understand the behavior. So I'm really grateful to this small colony of capuchins that the zoo gave to us. Well, at that point, I designed a new series of experiments that had to do with the tube task, a task that has been used over and over again. And of course, Camello was very good in solving the task. He did it in a total of 36 minutes. And I remember that exactly when I did that experiment, Steve Sumi was visiting my lab, and he was absolutely enthusiastic. Steve Sumi is always enthusiastic But he said, oh, this is inside, it's marvelous, you should write a paper, send it to the best possible journal. And I said, why inside? I mean, he had the sticks, he had the nut. I mean, perhaps there are more parsimonious explanation of this behavior. And in fact, when I published the paper, I had a more parsimonious explanation, as it's usually the case with me. I also added to the plain tube condition that you see represented here, condition in which they were, for example, sticks bundled together, and you had to unbundle the sticks to use them, sticks blocked, or short sticks that you should place one after the other. And my Capuchins overall were successful in these conditions. But what was interesting to me again is that they made errors. And the errors were rather, unexpected. They used the tape of the bundle instead of one of the stick. They inserted one short stick on one side and the other on the other side instead of adding one after the other. And these errors were not only in the very first trial, but they kept. I mean, it's true, we did not test the Capuchins long enough, probably, but the errors were not dismissed immediately. And we were also interested in seeing, but what other primates, what chimpanzees or children would do in a similar condition. And we carried out a series of experiments with the chimps and children, and we discovered that, in fact, in both cases, the errors disappear much quicker than in Capuchin. So there is a difference among the species. And there is a difference also in another aspect that really liked and interested us a lot. That is the learning, how children learn to solve this task. And are children helped in learning? And learning is quicker if they are shown how to do it. And this is a long series of experiments in chimpanzees, in capuchins and children that overall show that for capuchins, the social influences are not a very strong help. For chimpanzee, a little better. And for children above a certain age, this really makes a difference. While for adult capuchins, I repeat here, it doesn't make a big difference. But again, we tested in the lab with not so much trials. I mean, it's not that we tested for 1 year every day, a couple of hours, as is the case for life. We also did another series of the experiments in which we compared apes, capuchins, and children. That was the trap tube. In this case, the stick has to move a reward, not toward the trap, but toward the end of the tube so that it can get out. Of course, if you insert the stick always on one side, since the reward is placed on this side or in this side, you will have a 50% chance of success. But for capuchins, we had a very smart individual, Roberta, who did highly above chance, did very well, learned the rules. Here you can see how cautious she is in moving the reward toward the end of the tube. And here you can see that this happened in the first 70 trials. He is making errors. He's pushing the reward toward the trap. But after about 70 trials, she became highly successful. Here is a young chimpanzee that does exactly the same errors of Roberta. And just to sum up, chimpanzees do better than capuchins, and they also are not inclined to make errors or to use the previous rule when the trap is above the tube and is not necessarily to avoid it anymore. Okay, second take-home message. Describe the results of an experiment in terms of success, but think about failures and what they mean, and be cautious in your interpretation. Well, Capuchins fail in learning about how to use but what happens in daily life when they have to learn about the quality of food? Do they pay a lot of attention to what others do? Apparently, yes. I mean, monkeys watch each other all the time. We carried out a long series of experiments on socially biased learning about food. We look at food preferences, food aversion, responses to novel food and social influences, together with Dorothy Forghesi, Elsa Dessa, Gloria Sabatini, and many, many other students that did experiments in the lab and some in the field as well. And again, to sum up, in contrast with what seems the most plausible idea, Capuchins pay a lot of attention to others feeding, but do not learn by watching them what to avoid, for example, or what is preferred. Is in fact demonstrated in several experiments that is the personal feedback that the individual has from its digestion process and amount of energy acquired by eating the different food, that he learns and he arrives to have a scale of preference among food. At the beginning, likes the most full of sugar, but then each individual learns to prefer the most energetic food. And it's not different if the individuals are alone or individuals are presented with this new food in a group. So this, I think, changes the idea of thinking to the process of food preferences acquisition or food aversion acquisition. We also did an experiment on food washing, and I want to mention this only because I know that there will be on primates soon a special issue in honor of Professor Kawai that we all read and appreciated during the entire life. And this contribution written by Dori Forghesi and me is about our experiments done in 1990, in which we show that in captivity, capuchins and crab-eating macaques quickly acquire this behavior in it's a couple of hours. So it doesn't seem so difficult. And also it didn't seem that the social influences were very important. Okay, in Rome, we did many other things. We looked at the sexual behavior and physiology of capuchin monkeys. We looked at the facial expression and what they mean. We did many other research projects carried out by other colleagues and by me, but unfortunately, there is not even time to mention them today. But you can find most of the references and descriptions of this experiment in our website. The next phase for me and Dori was, okay, what to do next? And we did exactly what Mike told us before. We looked for a friend, expert in the biology and behavior of capuchin monkeys in the wild, and we decided to write a book. And in 2004, Cambridge published The Complete Capuchins, that is not complete anymore, of course. And this was a tremendous effort. And if you look at the main point coming out of the book, you see that, I mean, capuchins are really widely distributed. There are now, we know, 2 genus, Cebus and Sapasius. They have a long infancy compared to other monkeys. They have a long life compared to other monkeys. they are more encephalized than other monkeys. They are omnivorous, they hunt, they eat birds, rats, lizards, and things like that. They extract tubers, as a very nice study by Valentina Truppa and his student has shown. They have an enormous behavioral plasticity, but still they are so far from us. 35 million years ago, we have a common ancestor. And they are, of course, to use it in captivity, but exactly when we were finishing the book, something really nice came out in the, oh, my telephone, I'm sorry, I have to turn it off. Really sorry for that. There was a short paper writing about birds and publishing 2 pictures of capuchins cracking nuts in Brazil. And we had just the time to place a few pictures in the book and ask the people for more news. And this was very fortunately, because a dream could become true. Well, this is I think, the best phase of my life, because we started to do field work to look at tool use behavior in the wild. So in 2013, there was the first expedition together with Patricia Iser of the University of Sao Paulo. And right after, in 2014, at the IPS in Hanoi, we were already 3 good friends working together for the rest of our lives. And we set a project called the Itocibus project. At the time, the genus Sapagius was not recognized yet as distinctive. And our field site is here in the middle of nowhere. And in this Fazenda Boa Vista in Piauí, we started to look at this unbelievably nice and interesting behavior, the tool use behavior. We studied 2 different groups of capuchins, and we were able to do field observations and at the same time field experiments, something really new, as Mike Huffman was mentioning before. So we did the observation of spontaneous behavior, ecological data, ranging patterns, socially biased learning, feeding behavior, and at the same time, experiment on stone tool selection, nut positioning, kinematics of strikes, tool transport, kinematics of transport. We were even able to weight each individual and to know how they grow through time. Nobody before had a body mass taken from wild capuchins. And this is true for the vast majority of monkeys in the wild as well. Well, the 2 groups were habitually using stone tools around the ear. And we had a provisioned group to which we gave a little food so that they visited an area where we were able to do experiment. And a non-provisioned group, I mean, the food was very little, and a non-provisioning food. And you can see that the group do almost the same frequency of tool use over the months. And what they were cracking, the most cracking was done for these pole nuts, 86%. And tool use accounted was rare. I mean, was not extremely frequent for 1% of the time budget. These nuts, however, are extremely interesting because they are very, very hard. They have a wooden kernel that for some species is 20 times harder than that of walnuts. Is similar to the hardest nuts that the Thai chimpanzee crack. And these monkeys are the size of a cat. So imagine the effort and the skillfulness necessary to crack them. Well, what is important about our results is that in Fazenda Boa Vista, monthly frequency of tool use is not correlated with fruit availability or insect availability. In many field sites, capuchins have less food resources than in Fazenda Boa Vista, and they do not use tools. The capuchins use tools in captive condition with food abundant. So the idea, the common assumption that tool use is due to food scarcity, is prompted by food scarcity, does not hold in Fazenda Boa Vista. And what is interesting is that in Fazenda Boa Vista, capuchins have a high degree of terrestriality, spend a lot of time on the ground, much more than in other field sites. The presence of the necessary elements for stone tool use is there. There are stones, there are encased food items, there are anvils, and the food is rather abundant, and there is a lot of free time. It is more abundant in Fazenda Boa Vista, the food, than in other field sites that have been studied so far. And in fact, the kids play much more than in other sites. So there is free time. So this suggests that it's not necessary for survival to crack open nuts, but it's something that capuchins do and like to do because it's a good food to eat. And also in the case of chimpanzees and of orangutans, there is a live discussion about the role of terrestriality in prompting tool use, and also that food scarcity is not absolutely necessary to elicit tool use. And of course, I mean, this condition, high degree of terrestriality, presence of the necessary elements for stone tool use is exactly what I wrote in '87. Okay, the third take-home message. Assumptions are not necessarily true. Tool can be present and or emerge not only to survive, but other factors like opportunities, play, chance may promote it. Okay, capuchins in Fazenda Boa Vista select the stones that are used to crack open the nuts. Fazenda Boa Vista is full of sandstones that are not good because they crack when used. Quartzite and siltstone are extremely, extremely, extremely rare, but capuchins look for this kind of stones when they have to crack the nuts. We did an experiment in an area where capuchins come, the provisioned group comes, and we selected one individually, hopefully when others were not close by. We presented a choice in a choice location, 2 or more stones to choose from, and the capuchin had log anvils where to go and crack the nuts. And we tested many individuals in this task and presented the natural hammers, artificial hammers, 2 identical hammers of different weight, and other conditions. I'm not the time to explain everything here. The point is that the vast majority of subjects were always successful. Some of them had some failure, but in fact, our nutcrackers immediately use a non-friable tool and prefer to use the non-friable tool than the friable one. They looked for a weight that was sufficient to crack the nut. And they did so also when the stone presented were completely new and had, for example, characteristics not easy to distinguish because they were identical, but they differ only in the weight. So they learned to hold the stone or to touch the stone with the finger to listen to the noise and choose the full stone that was heavy and use it. So our experiment, I'm sorry that you didn't see it, but again, you can find it on our website, demonstrate the tool selection takes into account multiple physical properties of the percussor as friability and weight, and dismiss others as appearance and size. The observation of spontaneous behavior with pole nuts and cashew nuts provides convergent evidence. As far as it is known so far, the stone tool behavior of Fazenda Boa Vista capuchins is similar to that of the Thai chimpanzees. So the fourth take-home message is, even if most colleagues have opinion different from yours, keep working hard and perhaps you or they can change mind. And this reminds me of the many discussions I had with primatologists working with chimpanzees that really dismissed completely what capuchins could be able to do or do just because they were small monkeys from South America instead of apes. And of course, I mean, I think that we worked hard and we proved that this is not necessarily the truth. Okay, now the last part, behavior tradition are the behaviors shared among members of the group that are reliably learned by young individuals, in part by social support. Of course, we ask ourselves whether stone tool use is acquired thanks to the fact that others already know how to crack open nuts. So its acquisition is socially biased. We did a very complex experiment, a developmental study that lasted a total of almost 3 years with 5 collection periods on 16 youngsters, in which the observers were observing exactly at the same moment both the focal youngsters, then what happened around the focal hamster within 10 meters from the focal youngsters, and especially looked whether some individual was cracking nuts. Here is a summary of the results. Youngsters are highly tolerated by nutcrackers. Youngsters are interested by the nuts and attentive to nutcrackers. Youngsters repeat some of the actions performed by nutcracker. And here are the actions. They manipulate nut, they percuss nut directly against hard surfaces and they also strike nut with the stone. So these actions are socially biased. They become more frequent. Taking leftovers, what people usually label as scrounging, is 9 times more likely near an anvil. Of course, there are more leftovers. 3 times more likely when someone else is cracking. Of course, there are more leftovers. And it peaks between 1 or 2 years and becomes absent at 5 years. And this is why, because the older individuals are less tolerated by nutcrackers than the very young ones. The rate with which youngsters manipulate pounded and stroke nuts is significantly higher when others crack or eat nuts in their vicinity. And it's higher for at least 5 minutes after the nut cracking action by the expert individual has started. So this frequency is higher for a long period of time. And even when they stop cracking, the action becomes slowly more frequent. And very interestingly, these actions are higher than expected, also when the anvil site is without any expert group members, is empty, I would say. So this facilitation occurs even if the tool users are not there. In some others, nut cracking and the sites of nut cracking are potent facilitators of youngster practice with nuts. So when others are cracking nuts, young Capuchins devote their attention to nuts, not other objects, and percuss strike them for a while. On the basis of all the above results, we argue that the development of longer, sustained attention to others and their own percussive activities supports the acquisition of nut cracking in Capuchins. And that the iterative practice in socially supportive context characterizes the learning context for culturally acquired instrumental skills in Capuchins, as well as in humans and in other species, we believe. So the fourth and final take-home message is that probabilistic weak biases prompted by the social setting can have big impact on the acquisition of tradition. Wherever culture is involved, weak cognitive biases rather than strong innate constraints should be the default assumption. This is what Thompson wrote in his PNAS article in 2016. Well, many things about our project, the Tosibus project, can be found in this DVD. I'm sure that Mike has a copy, or I can send a copy to those that want to have it. And I want to thank many people, too many to be in a slide, all my colleagues and students in Rome, and here are just some of the names. My colleagues Dori and Patricia Iser, and their student helped hard in Fazenda Boavista. And of course, the monkeys, which taught me so much. And finally, my colleagues all over the world with which I exchanged ideas and built collaboration, and of course had fun. And here is a picture in Arashiyama in 1991 with Mike Huffman. So our friendship is really 30 years old. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. We have about 15 minutes, a little over 15 minutes for discussion. And we've got a bunch of people on Zoom and also on YouTube. So I'd like to invite questions from the Zoom audience first. If you'd like to ask questions, yes, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Hello, Elisabetta. Thank you very much for the talk. It was terrific. In fact, I couldn't leave. I had to go and rearrange my life. Maybe you could rearrange your dentist.
No.
No. Okay. Now,
but we can.
Sorry, go on.
We can have questions another time. If
yeah,
you want, you can call me.
Yeah, but it never happens. This is a good chance. I want to ask a bit about the difference which I noticed between our Bodongo chimps and your Capuchins, which are like the Thai chimpanzees. Now, okay, our Bodongo chimps are not like the Thai chimpanzees. They're quite different in respect to tool use because they don't use tools. And so your talk made me think about this a little bit. We don't have stone tools because really I've never seen any stones lying around in Bodongo. So no tool availability. But we also don't have nuts. The trees are full of fruit and leaves and bark and all the insects and so on. Chimpanzees eat all those foods, but they don't have any hard nuts to eat. So no stones on the ground, no nuts in the trees. How can we have, stones to crack nuts? So that sort of puts a bit of it puts the cat among the pigeons. I was wondering, we did I'll just talk for a moment about Thibaut Gruber's experiment where he put a log with a hole in it and put honey in it which chimps love everywhere. Then he compared our Bodongo chimps with the Kibale chimps, which do use stick tools. Now, our chimps don't even use sticks, you see, in Bodongo. It's crazy, but, you know, sticks everywhere. So it's not like stones which don't exist. The sticks are there, but they don't use them. And Thibault laid some sticks by the side of the log with the honey, and they didn't use them. But instead, they took leaves from the trees and they used leaves. And of course, our chimps use leaves for making leaf sponges for getting water. So that's the tool use of Bodongo chimps. It's limited to leaves. So, you know, it's interesting that we have these differences, which I suppose what I'm sort of, you might think, oh, Vernon is saying that it's all down to ecology. In other words, the environment determines everything. No, I'm not really saying that. I don't really believe that because, as I said, the sticks were put out for the chimps and they didn't use them. It seems to be a completely cultural thing to me, a cultural difference. Our chimps, I would say, have not got any, and we've never introduced it ourselves. We are hands off. We don't do things for chimps to watch. We have never introduced the idea of using stick tools or stone tools. And the grown-up chimps, the adult chimps, do not do that in front of the young ones. So the young ones have no chance to watch it and learn it. So there's no social tradition and no acquisition. And but at the same time, our chimps are really healthy. They're in very fine condition. You know, they have glossy coats, and it just seems to me very difficult, really, to explain cultural differences. You know, if you want a real explanation, it's easy to say, well, there's no culture of using stones or sticks. But certainly for sticks, the possibility is there. And I simply would love to hear your opinion whether and why Bodongo chimps have never done this. Why are we so deficient in Bodongo?
First of all, I wouldn't say that you are deficient, because this is a wrong idea. The point is that if you don't have nuts or you don't have stones, I mean, it's not a deficiency. You don't have the opportunities. You cannot go to school if there is no school, right?
Okay.
Then, of course, it's easier to generalize something that you already know to something similar. So this is what the experiment on the artificial honey stuff showed. But I think there is an element that should be considered, that is chance. Because before culture existed, you should imagine that somebody invented the behavior by chance, by playing, by thing, with the necessary opportunities and the necessary time and in no rush. When this individual learn it, it may be disappearing because nobody catch up, or somebody else can catch up. And what I learned from my studies in the lab and the studies in the field is that time goes slow. You cannot wait few hours to see if the monkeys learned. You have to wait years. Capuchins acquire tool use during the 4th, 5th years of life, and they start pounding and playing by the nutcracker when they are a few months old. The chimpanzee require even a longer times. And this is a continuous exposition to the experts that crack nuts, but to a continuous playing with these objects until the individual that is socially biased, so that it's close to nuts, is close to stones, is close to others, is happy because sometimes eat a little nut and how good it is doing exercise, errors. And after years, it learns. So I mean, unless you do something like this, and I would never do it in the field, because then you change your population.
Yes.
And it's not what you want if you study ecology and so on. It's possible. And this is why I'm saying this, because if you take young chimpanzees in the zoo, in a rich environment, and you provide them with the opportunities to use tools, they discover sooner or later how to do it.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Not in 5 minutes.
No,
not necessarily. So I think that, I mean, I don't really like that kind of experiments, to tell the truth.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, and I think the word chance is very important there.
Exactly.
You've got it right. Chance, but also, yeah, what's not there, you can't do. And really, if we look at human beings living in different parts of the world, a lot of it is simply that something isn't there, you know, something but is that, would you say, does that count as ecological determinism?
I think we should leave space to the others, but I'm happy to talk with you again.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So looks like Ozan has his hands up. Would you like to turn on your microphone and speak?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for this presentation. And my question is not completely irrelevant with Mr. Reynolds' question, the last one. I'm a bit confused about the role of cognition or their cognitive abilities play in the trade-off between their social learning capabilities and their relatively advanced tool use capacities. In the presentation, it is said that they show a relatively weak social learning capabilities, but we can say that they perform relatively advanced tool use abilities. And I looked for an article written by you, but it's relatively old, 1990. It is said that their cognitive...
Monkey's ape?
No, Capuchins. They are unable to develop an understanding of the requirements of the tool tasks. So I was wondering how this can be possible.
Okay. Again, I stress that these, conclusions were based on relatively short experiments, with the time of the lab, so hours, weeks, months, but not years of life, and not continuous exposition of a task. Then what exactly understanding of the task means? I think that for a human being, when you solve, for example, a complex condition and you have the bundle and you unbundle it and you use a stick to solve the tube task, you acquire a very clear idea that you have to use one stick and not the bundle. And you are not going to the bundle to see whether it works after you tried probably once or twice in life. It seems to me that Capuchins have a more feeble appreciation of this. That, however, by looking at the results in the field with different kinds of tasks, even much more complex, I think that these kind of errors are more filtered and get much less frequent with the longer periods of time. So at the end, their body begin to know what kind of stone is heavy enough, big enough, not friable, and works better. But and this is what I think now. So also to to evaluate the cognitive capacities, probably you need more time than what is often the case in lab experiments.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Susan. More questions from the Zoom audience? Any of our students, perhaps? Well, while everyone's thinking, I have a quick question for you. So if you could, I know you had several take-home messages, but if you could travel back in time and meet yourself back in graduate school, what would be your #1 advice for her?
I think my advice would be, one, to do something that motivates yourself, highly motivate yourself, and for which you are ready to work hard. And also try to live and exploit the opportunities instead of planning everything ahead as a series of goals, because something unexpected arrives and you should be ready. Oddio santo. My telephone started to talk, but it's not with the voice. So I don't know what. So this is unexpected. So really one should not be in a hurry, because if you have a goal to be done in a certain moment, then you don't have space in your mind to think about unusual things. I mean, it's really what Mike was saying in his presentation. One thing I was wondering yesterday is whether we were able to afford this rhythm, because in the past, the deadlines were not so tragic as today, or not. So I was asking myself, am I giving advice that are valid today as they were at my times? This, to tell the truth, I don't know. You should experiment and see whether there is a little time for to think more instead of planning, and acting all the time. I hope there is some time.
All right, thank you. Let's see. We have time for a quick question, I think. If anyone on Zoom or on YouTube wants to ask a final question.
If not, I've got one message that I got from Elisa's talk, and I think it's something that students worry about often when their work gets criticized. I think that can be a very strong driving force to make you work harder. And those of us that have faced opposition with new ideas, I think it's forced us to work harder. And I can see how that worked very well for Elisabetta. So never give up and just believe in yourself and what you see and what the animals are telling you. And you can be like Elisabetta. You can fulfill your dreams.
I want to mention that during my life, there were also people that were supporting me. I mean, there were chimpanzee people like Mike or Bill McGrew that were interested in listening. Mm-hmm. Others were just with their preconcepts. So also you should find colleagues that are ready to listen to you.
Yes, yes, very true.
Okay, there's actually, I hear just one question from the YouTube audience. Can I ask my colleague, Dr. Nahoko Tokuyama, to tell us what that question is? Nahoko-san, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have one question from Gaida. And have you got any future project? I think she's asking your future plan in your research.
To tell the truth, I retired years ago. I'm still collaborating with my unit at the Institute. And I like to have this role of talking with younger colleagues and listen to their problems or to what they do. And I'm willing to finish what I started to do in Brazil with Dori Forghesi and Patricia Iser. And happy to listen to other primatologists, but I also think that I have back my life now, that I have a slower pace. I can do what I like. I went back climbing the mountains as much as I can, visiting museums and places, being with my family or friends. And these are things that I missed a lot and make me extremely happy now. So I think the time has gone for a slower process of moving outside primatologists, but I want to be in at least a little until I will die. This is my future plan.
Thank you, very nice.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we are right on time. So I'd like to thank Dr. Visalberghi. Please give her a big applause.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all the Japanese primatologists, because I met them in many, many occasions. I was supported by Professor Matsuzawa in many trips that I did in Japan. I learned many things from the apes in Inuyama. And so Japan is in my heart.